Won't you take me back to Tennessee?
The award-winning Tennessee WildCast is on the air with the latest info about hunting, fishing, boating, and wildlife watching. Now make welcome your host, drummer and outdoor expert novice, Jason Harmon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Tennessee WildCast. Thanks for tuning in. We got an awesome show lined up for you today. Hey, our public relations director, Emily Buck, has put together a piece for us, and we're going to share that with you today on WildCast. It interviews 4 of our land managers across the state.
And it highlights the importance of creating great habitat for both game and non-game species, and the importance of the opportunity for public land hunting is such an important part of this too.
Yeah, and whether you're flooding, burning, timber harvest, forest management, and other practices, this show covers it all.
Yeah, 95% of the acreage in Tennessee is privately owned, so you know it's ultra important for the land that we do control that we pay special attention to it and take good care of it.
Yeah, so if this is a show you normally listen to, make sure you go watch this week on YouTube, Carbon TV, or community TV station. But tune us in. Hope you enjoy it. And here we go.
There's a lucky few of us that get a chance to try to preserve what the world should look like in its most pure state.
I have an awesome job. I'd argue it's one of the best jobs in the country.
You have to retrain yourself to see the beauty in those wild places.
It's tough, but that's what wildlife needs. That's why it's called wild. Josh Emerson, I'm the WMA manager here at Bogota WMA. I killed my first deer when I was 6, and I met Mr. David Vandergriff that was the technician in Lauderdale County. And I was like, well, so you're not a gamer? He goes, no. He goes, I take care of all the wildlife. I was like, well, that sounds even better. I said, I'd like to do that. This is a special place. This is one of the few places where you can go. You can see deer, you can see turkey, you can see ducks. Occasionally you'll see a quail run across the road in front of you. And we've got rabbits galore.
My name is Nathan Wilhite. I'm the manager at Bridgestone Firestone Wildlife Management Area. I did surveys and research for waterfowl in North Carolina. Was a private lands biologist in south central Nebraska. Kind of found a niche managing and working, studying quail. Finally decided I've worked with private land managers long enough, and there's a lot of fun to be had there, and some good conservation work that can be done there. But in reality, if I can get my hands on a big chunk of land, I can make a big difference.
I'm the area manager of the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area. We're roughly over 200,000 acres, about 315 square miles. For us here, especially where this place is so big, we have this golden opportunity to preserve something for generations to come. For one day my grandchildren or great grandchildren might walk the same fields that I helped plant, and to me that's special.
My name is Pam McDonald. I've worked with the agency for 29 years. I did 16 years in law enforcement, and then I've been in wildlife management for 14. It probably started when I was a kid. The things I loved the most was being in the outdoors. I can remember hunting with my dad and just seeing a broom sedge field just blowing with the wind at the sunset, and it's where I always felt I was meant to be. Laurel Hill is 15,000 acres, and the Little Buffalo River runs right through the middle. We primarily focus on small game, but deer hunting is pretty popular here. We have special seasons and special hunts.
So our primary objective falls in line with the agency's mission statement. We enhance wildlife habitat and try to make it as good as we possibly can to support as many species of wildlife as possible. So we try to stray away from what we call random acts of conservation and just pop in little habitat pieces here and there. So what we've done, we created focal areas, and within those focal areas we try to create a mosaic of all these different habitat types, which is most important. So not most species don't just need one type of habitat, they need a multitude of habitats. So creating that juxtaposition of different habitat types, early succession, young forest, old forest, wildlife openings, stuff like that, I think is the most critical part in successful wildlife management.
Every management decision is going to come down to what species are you prioritizing, right? And ultimately, on wildlife management areas, we're going to tend to prioritize game species, right? Because we're targeting conservation that is going to work for a variety of species, but it's also going to be beneficial to our hunters. So habitat, simply put, is broken down into 4 categories, right? Space, water, food, cover, okay? And regardless of what species you're managing for, you are trying to meet all of those needs in the smallest amount of area possible, okay? The reality is, the farther any wildlife species has to go to meet or fill all of those needs, the more exposed they are to predation and disease, anything else. When I'm looking at kind of downstream effects of management, I have to think of growing seasons, right? Because we have 7-8 months a year where the vast majority of our plants are dormant, and they're not reproducing, they're not growing, but they still have to provide all the resources that we talked about before. And so when you're talking about evaluating a management decision, some of that depends on timing of year of when it's done, but a lot of times you're thinking, what's this going to look like next year or 3 years down the road? And all of that, again, is kind of tied to your objectives.
So you have to think about it for the whole year. And so every time we get on a piece of equipment, whether it be a tractor with a chop disc or a sprayer, or we decide what we're going to burn, you have to look at what's around you and what's around the field, what's around even on private property, and you have to decide what's needed here. Is it brood area? Is it food source? How close is it to water? You have a lot to really think about and study about.
So management does happen over time, and time is our friend and it's our enemy also. It's a lot of moving parts to this train, I guess you would say.
From my perspective, the biggest challenge is helping folks realize what's good for the wildlife is not always what they might consider or expect it to look like.
We as a culture have grown so accustomed to perfectly manicured land, yards and farms, even farms. People move in and buy, 25, 50 acre farm, and they want it to look pristine. There's not a weed out of place. Every fence line is clean, and, it looks great, but it's not beneficial for wildlife really at all.
We're so accustomed to our yards being mowed and clean, they see a kind of a grown-up area and they're like, why don't you bush hog that? Why don't you bush hog that? I think once you educate them on the diversity of plant and animal species that thrive in that kind of environment, it kind of opens their eyes. For us, early successional habitat is kind of that field stage right before it gets into the early forest stage of succession. Sort of the baseline where, animals have food, cover, the ability to rear young, protection, cover from the elements, and it just supports an abundance of different wildlife species, from game species to non-game species, threatened and endangered species, small mammals, birds. It supports a variety of wildlife. We want to create more of that here. Like, I would like to see a good 25-30% of the area converted to that type of habitat, because as Bill Smith used to say, he's a former employee here, we have plenty of trees. Just look around. There's, Tennessee is covered in trees, but what we're lacking is that early successional habitat. So if an individual is to come out here, they might look around and think that it's messy and that we're not really doing anything here. We've kind of let it grow up. It's quite the contrary. This is exactly what we want it to look like. We actually spent about a little over $100,000 trying to get it to look like this versus the historic fescue cattle pasture that it used to be. Fescue doesn't really benefit wildlife in any form or fashion, so using that time and money and, through prescribed fire, getting the habitat to look like this. We have definitely enhanced this habitat for birds, small mammals, game species such as deer and turkey. So I would expect to see a more diverse array of wildlife utilizing this area than it would have before. Nothing beats boots on the ground, getting on the ground, and prescribed fire is a major tool that we use. It's very cost effective. We can affect large amounts of acres with it. And then the easiest way to kind of set back succession that we have used is a helicopter application aerial herbicide. As far as the cost per acre, it's pretty efficient, and we can convert a lot of acres of early successional forest back to early successional habitat pretty quickly. You want to try to put things on a rotation. As you start to see woody encroachment into your early successional areas, it's kind of an indicator that you need to burn or maybe spray again and kind of reset that habitat. So to a certain point, it becomes just like a maintenance thing. So like you've created the habitat and now you just have to set up a schedule in order to maintain that.
Prescribed fire, I'm a firebug, right? That's what I love to do. That's one of the few things that just gets my heart going, right? Kind of scares you a little bit, but at the same time, helps you realize the full potential of what a property can be. Where we're at right now, this area is burned every 2 years. Right, and so I think a lot of folks think if you're burning every 2 years, there's no way you've got trees that are coming up and growing to it. But we've got shortleaf pine and post oaks and mockernut hickories that before long are going to be in the overstory casting big shadows, right? And all that does is show you that that's what they're designed to do. Their competitive advantage is to beat out other tree species that don't deal with fire well, and they're not here by accident.
This was burned just probably about a month ago, but we've got green coming back already. We'll expect a diversity of wildflowers to be showing themselves from late March all the way through the summertime, and normally those wouldn't get to express themselves if we weren't burning this time of year.
Last year we burned close to 900 acres, but our average burn size was about 30 acres. Okay, that's based on the species that we're prioritizing, right? I don't want to burn something in a quail covey to have to move a half a mile down the road to places that they're entirely unfamiliar with after a fire. And so that's why those burn unit sizes are smaller. But when you do that, and you're doing that in 2 different counties an hour apart, every time I have a burn, I'd love to have a dozer nearby. I want to have a tractor with a disc. I want to have a nurse trailer which holds 1,000 gallons of water, right? We're driving ATVs and UTVs with water tanks, and I'll have anywhere from 5 to 8 or so folks burning with me. And so there's a big constraint when it comes to burning, especially at a very small scale. And so Tennessee Division of Forestry is our biggest partner when it comes to that. One of our biggest contributors is some local chapters of Quail Forever. Smoky Mountain Quail Forever in Knoxville, Tennessee. That group is they're a blessing to us, and they've provided funding for all kinds of things, from traps to trap nest predators, to paying for part-time employees.
Because it's so beneficial for wildlife to have those small woody trees, because you have the cover that protects them from avian predators like hawks and owls, but it's open at the soil level so that their young can maneuver through it, but it's hard to keep it there. So when you get trees that are more like 3 to 6 inches, then you have to either take a dozer or you have to mulch it, which the mulching is good because you're done all at once. You can just eat the trees up and it spits out mulch more or less. Instead of dozering, you have to push these piles up, then you have to burn them, and a lot of times it takes 2 to 3 weeks to finish getting them burned and out of the way. And then the disking, we use it as well, but it also will turn the soil over, and so it completely can destroy, the root system, and you're kind of starting from scratch. So like if we have a good composition of say warm season grasses that we want to keep, we might just spot spray trees or just go in and spot mulch the bigger trees that we want rid of, and versus disking, you kind of take it all down to nothing and start over again. So the different plant communities all benefit wildlife in different ways. Some may be areas that are good for nesting, some are good for broods when they have their young hatch, some are good for cover, some are good for feeding, and that's kind of the goal, is that you want a lot of different plant communities that are fairly close together, and they all have their own unique qualities.
As far as early successional habitat, we try to have everything in different stages, and that's a moving target. It never stays exactly where you want it to. It's just like shooting a duck flying away. It gets further and further as time goes by, and that's a challenge that we have with the weather, with floods. Down here versus some of the other spots across the state is, once we get bare ground, it doesn't stay there very long. Within a week, we've got, depending on the time of the year, we've either got willows coming up if it rains, cottonwoods, or we might actually get something that we want. And if we have to start over a lot. But that's probably one of our biggest hurdles, is just fighting succession itself, especially in fertile soils. And that is our messy habitat, but that's what we need for our wildlife. That's where our turkeys are going to nest, our quail are going to get on the edges of it. And that's kind of what we're managing for. I know there's a misconception of that, but that's what we really want.
We've talked a lot about early successional management, but there's a lot of properties that, forests are a priority, and healthy forests are a priority, right? And so if I were managing a forested landscape and I wanted to prioritize white oaks and hickories and everything in between, I might be writing a management plan that's 80 to 100 years. I mean, most of these trees you see in here are probably 15 to 18, 20 years old, right? And they're a long way. These post oaks aren't producing acorns yet. And so if I sit there and think, okay, I'm going to create an oak savanna or even an oak forest long term, that's not something that I'm doing in 2 years. That's something that's playing out over 40 to 50 years, right? And ultimately that's what hunters want to sit under when they're hanging a deer stand, when it's a good mast year. The south side of the property is all timber, old timber company, and so we have a lot of loblolly pine trees, some that we're cutting now, more that we hope to cut in the future, and stuff we've cut in the past that we're kind of in full restoration mode on as well.
So we're standing in some of the exact acres that we hope to be cutting moving forward, and what you see behind me is a landscape of largely all trees, right? There's no herbaceous vegetation underneath. There's leaf litter. So especially this time of year, there's no food that's really available for most species in this area. There's a limited cover. When we're talking about turkeys having nests, there's not many good places to lay a nest or to raise a brood. And there's certainly not available cover for northern bobwhite. And so moving forward, the goal will be to reduce the tree coverage, and especially the canopy coverage in this area, right? When these big oak trees and hickories, when they die, they're not going to be replaced by other oaks and hickories, okay? What we have to do, if we want to prioritize those species 50, 80, 100 years down the road, we've got to do management activities that are going to allow them to have their competitive advantage.
Oftentimes timber cuts are perceived by the public as negative, but for us as wildlife managers, professionals in this field, they're a great way to enhance the overall habitat in a given area. They can produce the landowner with monetary benefits, but they provide wildlife with just something different than a closed canopy forest, which does not offer much. It is a very benign and monotypical habitat. So by doing timber cuts such as the one you see behind me, it just enhances diversity in the habitat and the amount of animals and the wildlife that you can find here in the area. We often work closely with our forestry division. They have rotational timber harvesting to take advantage of managing the forests appropriately so that the forests are as healthy as they can be. Trees get so big and eventually they die. Well, we don't just want to let them die, we want to take advantage of that. So we're able to harvest them and get some benefits from that, but in the process we can we can conduct those silvicultural practices to enhance wildlife habitat to the maximum effectiveness. So if you look behind me, you'll see a lot of what we do is shelter woods or thinnings or crop tree release, or sometimes even a clear cut, depending upon the desired result of the silvicultural practice. And so with this particular cut, if you kind of look at the trees in the background, you'll see that it's dominated by white oak, which is preferred oak species for animals like deer and turkey. And this year we're really lucky, we kind of have a bumper crop. So if you were to pick along the ground here, you would see just acorns all over the place. So if you look right here, this right here where you can see the leaves have kind of been pushed away and you can see these exposed acorns on the ground. This is evidence of wildlife, probably deer, elk, or turkey or squirrels feeding on these white oak acorns. Again, we talked about the mass crop, but this is a necessary food source for animals going into winter time to help put on that necessary body mass before they go into the harsh winter.
Our wetlands here on Bogota are very important for our waterfowl habitats, and we do manage this very intensely for our waterfowl hunters. Essentially, our whole WMA here is a wetland. We're in the floodplain, but we're protected from the Mississippi River by the Great River Road levee, but we get spring floods from the Obion River that runs here along the bluff on the south side of the WMA. So we do flood every year, but the important thing about a wetland is it's not a permanent body of water. It dries out. We usually try to have water 3 weeks before hunting season, before their dates, for huntable water for the ducks to get in the area. Well, pump water is needed all winter, and we flood these up in stages. We flood it up as the ducks eat the food, and most ducks are 12 to 18 inches or less is all they need to dabble in. And then we let it hang out for a little while. We have lots of ducks that migrate back and forth through. We'll hold water here in this pool probably until about March the 20th before we ever started to turn anything loose. But this pool, we usually don't get it dry till almost July. It's almost the 4th of July before it gets back dry where we're sitting here now. And that's an important part of that wetland that does dry up. It has water on it for 6 months out of the year, but it does finally dry up. There's a big misconception that ducks need corn and that's the only thing they need. Which that's why we have so much moist soil production here at Bogota, to prove that we don't have to have a great stellar corn crop and thousands of acres for that. There's a lot of stuff that people don't really realize about moist soils. When they drive by, they see a growed up field and say, well, they didn't do nothing to that this year. They didn't plant any corn. We didn't. There's no corn. There is tons of seed here, and if you dig around in the grass, we'll find tons of bugs. And we had a class come out a couple years ago in a field that we flooded both the same time. One was planted in Jap millet and one was moist soils. We flooded them on the same day. We had 5 kids with nets walk around for 30 minutes, and I think they found 5 bugs in the planted Jap millet field. In our moist soil net, the teacher walked over and scooped one time, and we had like 60 bugs in his net just with one dip. So that's some of the differences that we have in our moist soils. We'll fertilize our moist soils, we spray our moist soils. If we don't like what we got, we'll disc strips in them. If we don't like what comes back when we disc strips, we can reflood it, start that process over. That's the good thing about moist soils. If you don't like it, you got 2 or 3 times to retry it before you start over. If you don't like it, you can come back and plant Jap millet. So there's always a backup plan. And we don't ever do a whole unit in one thing. That way we never have a total loss. Our habitat that we provide here is essentially an island surrounded by ag field.
I imagine it's hard sometimes to give everybody what they want.
It is. It's a lot of chaos involved in it sometimes. We'll have days where the rabbit hunters are just having a banging day and the duck hunters aren't doing nothing, and I'll go check duck hunters and I'll say, well, you might need to go just find you a rabbit hunter and go rabbit hunting with somebody today if you want to shoot something. And there'll be days that you won't hardly hear any rabbit hunters, but the ducks are, they're just banging. So that's one of the neat things about this WMA is you're always going to bump into somebody who's out here enjoying something. I enjoy meeting the people, and just they like what we do, so I like to see them enjoy what we do every day.
Our funding primarily comes from our hunters and the hunting community, and and so I shouldn't be doing anything that long term isn't going to be a net positive for our hunters, right? And so when I'm making management decisions for any species, the goal should be that on one day we're going to have more hunters and better opportunities for those hunters. Long term, I'd love for folks across the state to be able to have a place they can come and run a bird dog and chase wild birds.
So we have a lot of different user groups here, and this WMA is home to hunting, fishing, rock climbing. We have a shooting range. We have an off-highway vehicle trail system. So the constant crossover in availability of land between those user groups often results in conflict. So managing people is a massive part of what we do, and the best way to do that is kind of through regulation or boundaries or habitat types and just overall maintenance of the WMA. There's an elk viewing tower here. It receives anywhere from 16 to 20,000 visitors a year. We're supporting thousands of OHV riders, and we support thousands of hunters across the state and outside of states. So that's one great thing about this property is it supports so many, thousands and thousands and thousands of outdoor recreationalists. And that, I think, ultimately falls right in line with the agency's mission, and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So, the fact that so many people can come enjoy this, for generations to come, and experience the outdoors, and hopefully what we think in the best light possible, that gives you satisfaction at the end of the day.
I've always had a great team around me as far as my techs. That's the only way you can do it is if you're all working towards the same goal and get along, enjoy the day, are productive. And to me, I try to keep the sportsman on my mind in all that we do, and I think that makes a big difference. When we go to the check station and they brag on us or they say we see the work that y'all are putting in, that's what it's all about to me. Because ultimately, they pay the license, and the license is what pays me. So to me, they're really my ultimate boss.
Stay connected with TWRA by visiting our website at tnwildlife.org. And follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can invest in Tennessee's wildlife future by purchasing a license at GoOutdoorsTennessee.com. That's GoOutdoorsTennessee.com.